Hello, everyone, and welcome in today. My name is Michelle Young, and we're here at My Vinyasa Practices podcast, Heartfelt Consciousness with Gil Hadly. Thanks so much for being here, Gil.
My pleasure, Michelle. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. Well, Gil is a deeply spiritual educator, passionate about anatomy, and has been working with the human form for the past 30 years. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your journey. Tell us how it started.
Well, I guess I somewhere up in heaven thought I should get in there again. We want to really go way back. And then I've been trying to figure it out ever since I got here. Life and form, it's kind of a mystery. I was rebellious to it at first. I was like, why am I being punished with this body? And then eventually came to see it as the gift that I now recognize it to be. Through my own personal development. Uh, I was a bodybuilder as a kid. I grew up in the 70s. My heroes were Arnold Schwarzenegger and Frank Zane and Serge Nubret and a variety of other great muscled beasts of the 70s. And so that was really my first exposure to anatomy. I saw my anatomy in the mirror. I was like, damn, that's cool. And I could change it, which I thought was really cool, that I had it wasn't just stuck this way, that I could do things and my body would change. So I found that fascinating even as a young person. Took advanced biology, dissected a cat, went to college, worked in a biology lab, eventually found my way to grad school in the Rolfe Institute. At the same time, I completed my Rolfing training late in my PhD studies and kind of completed them together at the same time. And so I left grad school with a Rolfing certificate as well. And that exposed me to more anatomy through Tom Myers was teaching anatomy at the Rolfe Institute 30 years ago or more, 33 years ago, and time flies. And then I wanted to be a better Rolfer, basically. So I was studying anatomy, because I felt like I would be better if I knew more. And that led me to the laboratory. And it didn't take long till I was so completely compelled by the study of anatomy that my Rolfing practice sort of faded away into what I used to lovingly call my anatomy empire, an empire of one. And so I've been doing that for a long time now.
That's amazing. And you started out in theology, right?
That's true. I got my BA was in religious studies and then anthropology, but in my religious studies, I was focused on ethics. So I went to grad school and studied ethics and theology and philosophy at the University of Chicago. I got my master's and PhD there, studying Catholic ethics, basically.
That's fascinating to me. It's so fitting to have that spiritual awareness and then to embody it really through the study of the human form. I think that's really fascinating.
Well, that's the thing. My graduate student studies, it was not spiritual in the slightest. It's at the University of Chicago. It's like dissection, more like of religions than practice. And so that was interesting to me because I was a very faithful Catholic at the time. And then yeah, I did bring with me into my study of anatomy my interest in ethics, because if ethics is your way of being in the world, then our way of being in the world is an embodied way of being in the world. And I felt that in my ethics studies, we really didn't go into any connection to the body at all. In fact, it was valued if you would leave your body and float above it somewhere and have meta conversations about meta ethics. And that was what was valued there. And I thought, this is kind of bogus. If I don't get into my body and have a relationship with it, I'm not really qualified to pontificate about it as an academic. And so I thought, let me get into the body. And I did that through getting married and having kids. I did it through my Tai Chi practice, which I don't do anymore, but I did at the time. And I did it through Rolfing, and studying that. And I did it through dissection. I'm still doing it through dissection. I'm in an ever evolving embodiment practice through dissection, where my connection with my own body is ever deepening because of the studies that I do upon human form in the dissection lab. So this constant overlapping of my sense of the moral life and my way of being in the world as an embodied spirit and my dissection work.
I love it. I've been to the lab twice now with Leslie and Lori. I plan on coming out
Oh,
to spend
wonderful.
a full week with you at some point. We're going out again in October, and it's been one
Oh,
of
cool.
the most amazing experiences for me. I teach anatomy in my professional life, so to actually work with the bodies and to see how much of what we know from books is a misunderstanding. It's really fascinating. I spoke with Leslie about that a while back. But I'd love to get a little bit more information about integral anatomy. What is integral anatomy to you?
Well, it's so made up words. I make up a lot of words. So it's my favorite thing to do is to make up words, neologisms. So integral anatomy to me is stands maybe on the shoulders of, and sometimes in contrast to, the style of anatomical study that we call regional anatomy. So regional anatomy would be that anatomy that we know from our established medical community and the way that most people learn anatomy. I would say 99 and 44, 100% of people learn anatomy as regional anatomy, which would be identifying parts, naming them, and such, separating the body with an intention of identifying its parts as if it were a machine, pretty much. And regional anatomy would look to the machine for its analogy for the body and its understanding of it. And there's great value in that. So I don't mean to poo-poo it in the sense that, if you're going into the if you're going into surgery, you want your surgeon to know the difference between an arm and a leg. And what is your primary concern in that particular event? It's really important. At the same time, I'm extremely conscious that the body as a whole and is continuous and is part of a greater continuum of person and personality. And that if I fail to recognize the continuities, I'm missing a great deal with respect to my understanding of what a body is and who I am. And so integral anatomy, instead of emphasizing the parts with a view to naming them, emphasizes relationship, continuity, whole person, whole body, textural layers in relationship, looks to nature for its mirror rather than machines, and finds oneself reflected there in nature, so much so that I like to say that we're not cast out from the garden, that the garden is within us. And when you witness the garden within and then you witness the garden without, your identity can expand beyond the limits of the skin, which is so often our perceived container for our limited view of consciousness, poking out these eyeball antennas from our brains. And we think, well, that must be it. I'm just this being thinking inside of this head and looking out on a world that I'm separate from. But with integral anatomy, it's kind of an invitation to witness yourself. I'm looking out the window at the trees. Witness yourself sort of, inverted and breathing right there in those trees. Those are my lungs. That is part of my physiology. The sun is shared over the biological union of humanity, that there's continuity throughout all of humanity, and that my body is a singular representation of the human form that others have also taken and perfectly represented in their own way. So rather than looking, as regional anatomy does, to say the average or the mean as a ideal representation of human form, which none of us match actually, or even as a useful teaching tool, I consider the individual to be primary ultimately rather than the type. and to witness in a given individual human form an opportunity to recognize my own humanity in my own individuality. So it kind of goes like that. I see you as a mirror of my individuality rather than as a reflection of difference that I kind of stand opposed to somehow. So for me, difference is just something that happens in the continuing evolution of consciousness, right? Ideas form, structures differentiate. An embryo differentiates into many textures, and yet it remains a singular being, a singular body, which, if understood in the way I do, is just another cell in the great continuity of the whole of consciousness. And so, call me an Advaitist from your yogic understandings, but the body seems to prove it out to me pretty nicely. And it just, when I witness the interfaces of the tissues, I don't see the defining moment to create one thing and another. I see an opportunity to witness connection, to witness relationship, to witness continuity, and to embody that.
Yeah, that is, I mean, I think it's so inspiring to hear you talk about it because it is, it marries with yogic philosophy beautifully. And yet everybody has their own interpretation of that continuity, right? And what it means to them. And what I find really inspiring about you, Gil, is that you really do, like, you are so inspired by the human form and by that continuity that it inspires you creatively as well. I'd love to know a little bit about how you got into poetry and how that influences your work.
Well, that's interesting. I think that there's room in integral anatomy for the poetic moment because integral anatomy itself is very right-brained style of perceiving the world, which is to say, as a whole, in continuity, witnessed as one, and it's all about context as well. And so is poetry, right? So poetry is a way of using language, a way of using metaphor that emphasizes meaning through context rather than the reduction of meaning into types and objects. So it's a language style that kind of suits me, and it popped out much by surprise. I mean, I was poetic as a kid. I liked to write poems even in 8th grade and high school, publishing in the little school poetry notebook thing, but I forgot all about it until maybe 2011 when the muse hit me hard, and I started producing poems in relationship to relationships, and also with respect to my pursuit of this embodied life.
Yeah.
So the poetry fits in. And then I found myself reading the poems in class, which was fun, and I do like to punctuate it because I feel like when you can engage a person's mind at a poetic level, then they'll possibly um, sort of segue into engaging the body in a poetic level rather than a strictly objectifying one. And it really is the purview of the left brain to witness that which is, separated and remembered and dead, as it were. And you might think that by working with cadavers, that might make me a super left brain person. And in many ways, I am because I can get super ridiculously focused, which is also a left brain style. But I find that, the moment of engagement with that dead form and with the separating of it isn't the last moment in the process of learning. It's just a step that the separating out is a step that is followed by the putting it back together, and that's really the where the ahas come from, not in the pulling things apart, but in the putting yourself back together as a result of it. And I think poetry is a lot like that too. You kind of pull things apart, pull phrases apart, pull words apart, pull their meanings apart. And as you do so, the ahas that come from poetry are it's kind of the reemergence of a new set of meanings based on the witnessing of the of the parts coming back together in a new way.
That's beautiful. It's beautiful. How did you feel the first time you got into lab? The first time you dissected a body, a human form, what was that like for you?
Oh, it was pretty intimidating. I went to a lab with my friend in grad school who was in medical school at the time. I was in divinity school. This friend was in medical school, and he knew I had been to the Rolf Institute to study massage. And so I was a little ahead of him in his studies, and he welcomed my company when he went in on Saturdays to uh, to study for his test that was coming on Monday. He'd be like, oh, he and offered me the gift of the opportunity to come with him and study with him. And they had, maybe dissected that week, and then the other arm was not dissected. He's like, have at it. That's one's for you. And so, I mean, I'll never forget the first time I applied a knife to a human body, and with no instruction at all. And I just remember this kind of clear liquid came out of it, which is embalming fluid, of course. I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. And, that's kind of builds up in the tissues when it's been put in to preserve the body. And I was like, whoa, that's really, that's intense. And I mean, I had nightmares basically. I mean, honestly, my first several years of working in the lab was for me I was kind of PTSD from my own class. I didn't have any Gil leading me into it warmly. It was me without knowing what I was doing, making a mess basically, and trying to understand things that were surprising and new to me that weren't in the books. They don't draw all that stuff in the books. They just draw the completed dissection in the books and perfected. And it's not perfect and complete when you start it, right? So all those tissues that weren't ever drawn were like whole worlds that were terrifying to me, and were an affront, a confrontation to my sensibilities, to my emotions, to my psyche, to my sets of ideas, challenging everything. And so it was disturbing, to say the least, and in a very literal way, it was disturbing of my sense of perceptions and such. And it smelled and it was yucky looking sometimes when you make a mess and all that. And so all that together gave me nightmares. Cadavers getting off of tables and like starting to chat me up, or you're cut into them and they kind of sit up and look at you like interesting, huh? Let's look at this together. Or oh, I'm having a baby. Would you deliver it for me? All this crazy, like deep psychic stuff that was confronting me, and I didn't really want to do it anymore. I was like, this is too scary. But I had such a deep interest and an increasingly compelling desire to know more, because I could see this was like a whole world and I needed it bad. I needed this world of the body very badly. And so I kind of doubled down and committed, that I would push through to the other side of all that fear and terror and emotional challenge until I fell in love. I became comfortable. I became at ease, and that made me able to set a tone in a room that put other people at ease, and I could convey my comfort rather than my discomfort, and spare people the years of work and nightmares, to stand together around the table in appreciation and respect and awe and curiosity and excitement, rather than terror, fear, horror, all those things, which still can come flashing through at times. And yet it's not even remotely primary, and also stands subservient to the cause.
Absolutely. The first time that, we were so lucky to be at the Anatomical Research Center in Colorado Springs and
Yeah,
have,
Institute for Anatomical Research, my home
yeah,
base.
yeah, and have the team. I mean, like we had such compassionate people supporting us that first
Mm.
time that, yeah, we had some nightmares, but it wasn't something that was scary. It was poetic, and your poetry was there, and we did ceremony around the bodies, and really had a reverence for the gift that we were receiving, and having the opportunity to do this thing. And at the same time, I sort of can relate a little bit to, what am I doing? Like, I was just like, I had really had no true formal training, and when I left, I thought, I'm never going to do this again. And now I'm like, we're going to go every year. Like, there's no way I'm not doing this.
I totally get that. I was in that same situation. No professional background, no real knowledge, no talent for it even. And yet it's compelling, huh? It kind of
really is.
back for some people, once is enough. And then there are, those of us who realize this is a path. This is a way to learn, and it's bottomless. There's really no, you don't find the end of the universe, right? In other words, the body is this microcosm of the universe, and kind of all the stories are told here. I mean, I talk about textures a lot, because I work with people who are very kinesthetic and are feeling bodies, are working with hands-on in their practices. It's very important to them to understand textures, to be able to identify them, their properties, to recognize them under their fingers, etc. And the word texture is not unrelated, of course, to the word text that we use for writing in a book, right? So the texture, the body is my book. It's the book I choose to study and read over and over again, and to explore its textures, and to take them on and pursue meaning there. I used to say, as a grad student, and I learned to read my Bible in Greek, and was very into that, and enjoyed reading Gospels over and over again in Greek. And I did that for many years. And I used to say, oh, if there was whatever, a hurricane and the house was go on fire, I had to take one book. It would be my Greek Bible. And then after a while, I was like, no, I'm good. I don't need to take anything with me, actually, because I have this text. The whole text is here. All these textures can be read over and over and over again, and you continually, it's like Braille going over your body, continually gathering new meanings from touching those textures and their relationships to each other.
And absolutely, I think the lab has really informed a lot of my own personal somatic integration, and I had some really life-changing experiences this past year before going to India for a month. And I think it was the lab, and a lot of research I was doing for a new course I was writing. It just unlocked. You talk about text, it unlocked all this text within and outside. It was like, holy moly, I didn't even know that this stuff was there. It was like finding this archive, and it's just really fascinating.
Yeah, an archive. I like that word too.
So tell me about the term. Now, you said earlier that you love to make up terms, and I know that about you, but tell me about the term somanot. What is that?
Somanot. Well, somanot, soma for, I guess, Greek roots for soma, body, and naut, or for the sailing or to navigate, like nautical, so pertaining to that. So basically, a somanot then would be someone who sails or navigates the body, or I like to say inner space of the body. And I made it up. I made up the word to describe Emily Conrad, who you may or may not know. She was Emily Conrad Daoud when I first met her, but Emily Conrad, who's the founder of Continuum Movement, which is a beautiful movement practice that's a kind of a healing work that's still going on even after her passing. May she rest in peace. But so I interviewed Emily, and she is quite a character in her way of being in the world, and so embodied, and her breath, and how her different ways of breathing cause her to move and inhabit this form so differently. She was just a marvel to watch. And I was like, how do I describe this woman? I was writing an article for the Rolf Lines Journal. I was the editor of that many years ago. And And I was like, she's a somonot. I was like, because look at her. She's deep dive exploring like the astronauts explore outer space. The somonaut explores the inner space of the human form. And so that kind of became my go-to. I was like, oh, she's a somonaut. I'm a somonaut. We're all somonauts, like all of us who are engaged in that. So I actually named my business Somonautics after that, and had a website, somonautics.com, which would be kind of the adjectival form of somonaut, pertaining to somonauts, or all about somonauts, somonautics. And and then I realized no one could spell the word or remember it. So I changed it to integral anatomy, which I felt was also very apropos description of my work. Integral anatomy is something that somonauts do, or a way of studying, or a way of perceiving the body. And so then the word got picked up and people started using it all over the place. Emily loved the word. I'm not sure if she remembered where it came from, but I know she called herself a somonaut, included it in books that she wrote, and used the word frequently amongst her community, who occasionally come to me saying, do you know anything about this word? I'm like, yep, I know it really well. There's also a Polish heavy metal band called Somonaut. Uh, and their studio is called Fuzztopia. So I thought that was pretty funny.
Awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. For those of you
So-
watching the show that may not know, the fuzz is that, tell us a little bit about the fuzz, Gil.
well, that that whole thing. So basically, I I started telling myself stories very early on, trying to figure out what was going on. I mentioned earlier, seeing tissues that aren't in the book. What am I looking at when I tease the tissues apart, when I tease one muscle fasciculi away from another, and I see, looks like cotton candy in between the two, and I'm thinking, what is that? I didn't see that in the drawing. They don't draw that. I hadn't done dissection, so I didn't know what to kind of, I didn't have any dissection teacher that was directing me in the dissection. So I'm looking at this cotton candy and I called it fuzz. It was fuzzy. It looked like fuzzy stuff. And I wasn't really sure what it was. I wasn't sure that it belonged there. I didn't understand because, again, it wasn't in the pictures, it wasn't drawn. Ralph talked about the muscles gliding along one another like silk stockings. I took silk stockings to be two different things, and they weren't connected, but they went whoo, kind of pretty over each other. And I thought the muscles should be like free with no intervening tissue, that they were kind of loosey goosey in there. Of course, that's completely absurd. The body is continuous, but I didn't know any better. And there I'm staring at this fuzz. And so I called it fuzz and started making up stories about fuzz. And what is it? And I thought, is this, if it's not supposed to be there, is this like adhesions? Does it mean the body is stuck to itself in an untoward way? Of course, that's not true, but I did think it. And although it can be true, it can be that the tissues are stuck together in an untoward way, but they're always continuous. So the question is more about the quality of the continuity and the texture of the continuity rather than whether it's continuous or not. Like the idea that it could be discontinuous is absurd, and it's just a mistake in thinking, not remembering this embryo differentiating into a continuous form, not a form of separate objects. But again, we learn anatomy as a pile of separate objects. So why wouldn't you approach the body thinking it would just be separate objects near each other, kind of in a sack or something? And so that's just a misperception from a misconceptualization of the body that's written into regional anatomy. And so I about 10 years into working, I already knew that it was more than that. I knew that it belonged there. I knew that the tissues were continuous. I understood, and I had started talking, even in my DVDs, many years ago, I was already using the word filmy fascia, I think, or I talked about bags a lot. And so I was understanding that this, bag isn't a great metaphor either, but it's what I had at the time, and filmy fascia. And so what the fuzzy tissues really were membranes. And they were the membranes that represent the continuity of one texture and another. So whether it be one muscle fasciculi and another, it's not like you have a chunk of this and a chunk of that with air in between. No, you have fascia in between that is a different texture. And that texture is distensible and filmy. I like to say that as a textural word, and super hydrated, slippery, translucent even. And because it's comprised of collagen fibers that are organized in what I call a felted pattern rather than a dense regular fibrous pattern, it's more felted. It's more like wool that's been, mixed up together. And so when you pull it apart, it looks like cotton candy. It doesn't look like strings. It looks like fuzz. And so what I was really looking at when I was looking at the fuzz was these membranes being pulled apart. So it was the scene of destruction. The fuzz was the scene of destruction because you put it back together again and it's a membrane. You pull it apart and it looks fuzzy. And you can do this in a fixed body or in unfixed tissues. It doesn't matter. It's always there. It belongs there. And then the question is, what's its condition? And what is this stuff? And what it really is a whole body reservoir, like a fascial reservoir of superhydrated tissues that are the very anatomy of differential movement that permit one thing to go in one direction, one thing to go in another direction while they're still connected through that fascia. So it's a distensible membranous fascia. The fuzz, it would be its nickname when it's been embalmed and torn apart. That's when it looks fuzzy. In our bodies, living and pulsating with life, it's wet, superhydrated interface of tissues, slippery and should be, although it's not always. You see, if we're dehydrated or inflamed or injured or something, then those tissues become sites of adhesion and possible aberrant connection of tissues rather than ideal slippery connection of tissues. So we can go from slippery to gummy, we can go from gummy to crystalline, we can go to solid. And in those stages, we experience the various options for the limitation of our movement. And so, yeah, my thinking of that evolved a whole lot. And then eventually, not too many years ago, maybe 7 or 8 years ago now, I was like, I need a different word than filmy fascia. So we had fuzz. I called it filmy fascia for a long time. And then I changed its name again because I wanted to speak to other anatomists and have words that were adoptable by the fascia conversation, by the fascia community. And so I started calling it perifascia. So ultimately, the fuzz is perifascia, dried and torn apart. And it is the locus of differential movement in our musculoskeletal tissues. It belongs there, and we want to be mindful of its ideal condition and maybe cultivate that if possible through movement.
I think this brings me to one of the most, from the first time I was in lab, one of the most interesting and educational things that happened was we spent 3 days going through the adipose tissue of our donor. And
Yeah.
it took quite a long time, even though I didn't think there was that much there. There was so much there. And Lori kept talking about some of your work with the fascial matrix within the adipose tissue, which I found absolutely fascinating. Will you tell us a little bit about that? Because I don't think I do it justice when I tell students.
Well, sure. That adiposal layer just deep to the skin has many different names. Henry Gray, the most famous British anatomist, called it superficial fascia. And with that, he referenced the whole adiposal layer deep to the skin, or subcutaneous adipose, you might call it. So I picked up that terminology, and I've always referred to the fatty layer as superficial fascia, although in European nomenclature, which is ascendant now, and so they're changing it all over the world, that would actually be like adipose, and then the membranes within the adipose they'll call superficial fascia. So there are differences in nomenclature, just so you know. And you can go even further, and in Eastern Europe they have a whole different set of nomenclature. So so basically the adipose is a connective tissue layer. I can demonstrate it as a fascia because the fascia would be an aggregate of connective tissues that can be dissected into a sheet and demonstrated. So that's the basic rough definition of fascia: aggregate of connective tissues that's dissectable into a sheet. So I can do that with that layer. I've done it a bajillion times and it has structure to it, which is, confounding to folks who don't like to call the adipose layer fascia because they expect it to be very flat and thin. And the adipose layer can be quite thick, and depending upon where you are on the body or where you are in your life. And so that layer has a lot of structure to it. And it's super interesting to me. I haven't stopped studying that one yet. It's going to get a whole book someday. I suppose if I ever get time for it. I've made visual books of it so far, and then I'll make maybe a verbal accounting of it at some point to discuss all the complexity of that layer, and even its beauty and its complex array of functions. I forgot what your question was. I just started
Well,
rambling.
no, but I think that's great because it sort of takes me to where I was going. In our culture today, people they want a very thin layer of adipose. They don't see it as something that is important or desirable. And obviously we know it
Yeah,
is important and desirable. It
yeah.
has structure. It helps with movement. It helps with, hydration, all the things.
It's
But
a
what I,
big endocrine gland, actually.
yeah,
It's an endocrine gland, but we do have, epidemic obesity, and sometimes people are like, "Oh, Gil, you're always saying nice things about fat. What about obesity?" And I'm like, "Well, you can have a problem in any layer of your body. It's true, and we do have epidemic obesity due to horrific nutrition, which is brought upon us by our fast culture." But the thing is, if you start out from a position of hate with respect to a layer of your body that belongs there, that is intrinsic to the human form, that is essential to our metabolic functioning, then you're going to get all the wrong ideas about it. Try and make it go away altogether. And that has its own problems, right? So the same culture that has an obesity epidemic also has more bulimia and anorexia than any other culture in the world, probably. So these are both, I think, reactions to the problematization of the layer as if it didn't belong there. And
yeah.
so people hate themselves because they've got it. They hate themselves because they have it at all when it's their body. We have the continual problematization in our culture of the layers of our human form. And what better way to sell product than to make people think that something that's natural to them doesn't belong there, and then have them talk them into paying to make it go away through surgery, through diet, through exercise, through what have you. And it always turns out it's still there. And because it's like, it's like you're trying to make your femur go away. Your fat layer is not going to go away unless you're either starving or mentally ill, to the point where you're starving yourself intentionally. So there's the layer belongs there. And I think once we approach that there and say, oh, it belongs there, what its functions, why do we have this? And what does it do for us? What's the result? What's the positive physiological result for us of having this layer in our body? Then maybe we can come to a different relationship with it. And instead of starting with a no fat, low fat as our moral watchword for how our body should be, we instead say, oh, what a beautiful gift I have in this incredible adiposal fleece. What advantages does it bring to me? And how can I be in right relationship with it so that it doesn't become ill or morbid or injured or gone altogether? Whichever end of the spectrum the pathology lies, we have to kind of accept a happy medium in the human form. It's just part of our bodies.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was really taken back, about the conversation of how damaging, some of the surgical procedures that, we are selling to the public, to remove this fat, how damaging it is to the body and to the body's endocrine system and the function of the body. And, I thank you for sharing that with me because it was so profound, and then to spend so much time with it that first session was really an
Mm,
enlightening experience. And I agree with
good.
you, the
I'm glad.
relationship that we have with things
Yeah.
is so important. We don't want to divorce ourselves from these intrinsic parts of our wholeness, but can we have
Yeah.
a relationship there?
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel that the dissection process, at least the way I do it, and I know the way that Lori and and Leslie and Lydia have adopted that process as well. Gives it some time, gives each layer some time. And for me, each textural layer that you encounter during the kind of layer by layer dissection process places you into, a sustained attention with respect to that texture. You got to hang out with it for a whole day or more. And in doing so, you get a pretty clear hit on how that felt to you. Was that fun, exciting, revolting, disturbing? Did I go home and cry? What happened after I did that? And instead of blaming it on the person next to you or the class process, you take a conscious opportunity to look at it as a reflection of your relationship to that particular texture, that layer, that biological form that you encountered that day. And then think, okay, I felt pretty good about that one, or, ooh, I'm not all right with that one, actually. Very good to have that brought up from subconscious to conscious. Like, I don't feel right with that, and why not? And then my job, I feel, is to help people enter into aspects of positive appreciation for it. Like, let's just take it at face value. Let's understand what this is, what it brings to the table of a human in form, and then see if, when we bear witness to those aspects of appreciation that one could identify for that layer, then how might that change or shift your relationship to it? Does it awaken new treasures of a friend you already loved? Does it contextualize something that you hated in a way that you hated a little less, or are willing to give it consideration, thoughtful consideration, make a place for it in your body? And then sometimes you encounter tissues and you're like, I didn't know that existed. Like, you don't have a feeling either way. You're like, what is that? Like, that's a pretty common experience in a lab as well. And to me, that's also a huge opportunity for integration, to say, well, let's talk about what that is, and what its role is in the big picture, and how wonderful, isn't it, that we have. Hello.
Hello,
I
hello.
I was moving over here. No.
I wanted to touch base on the Nerve project because it was, first and foremost, I have to thank you for doing this, because I've been teaching chakras as innervation of the plexuses throughout the body for a long time. And it was very hard for me. I come from a very academic background. I was biochemistry major originally and ended up getting a master's in education. And so trying to teach this to people in an abstract way was really challenging, to express to them how this innervation impacted not only felt sensation in the body, but it had a psychological tie to it. And we were, experiencing these generally universal experiences based on different, stimulation. That's really the unconscious communicating through these different nerve networks, right? So what inspired you to do this nerve project? And thank you for it.
Oh, well, thank you for thanking me. And many years ago, I saw an image that stirred me, and it was from 1925, and it's a dissection image from the Kirksville College of Osteopathic Medicine in Kirksville, Missouri, which is the original school of osteopathy. And a couple of medical students at the school in 1925 were doing a real good job on the nerves of the arm. And their professors noticed what they're doing, were very impressed, and thought we should give these two a whole body. And so they gave them a whole body to dissect the nerves. The pair of med students spent about 1,500 hours on the project together. That's like 3,000 hours of dissection work, and basically extracted what remains the most complex and thorough representation of a single human being's nerve tissues to ever be dissected. they lacquered it onto a board and labeled it and put it on the road, and it traveled around the country for a couple of years back in the 20s and was you know, something of great regard at the time. And then it ended up sort of in the lobby wall at the university, where it remains to this day. And I saw an image of it and I was like, whoa, like I was like, I want to do that. Like, I just was like, how do you do that? Like, how did they do that? Just from a dissection perspective, it's a marvel because it's very challenging in terms of preservation, not breaking the tissues and preserve them as you go, having the whole thing not go moldy on you. It's very, very complicated to do what they did, and not easily repeated. In fact, never repeated. And I can't say I repeated it. They did a much more thorough job than me, but there was no context for it, you see. And I'm all about context. I want to see where that came from. I want to understand what, not just a bunch of names on a thing, but to understand what is the relationship of that to the other tissue layers, and how does that actually live and pulsate inside of our bodies, and can I demonstrate that process? And so that was, you know, one of the underlying kind of pipe dream goals of my life, was to, like, maybe I could do that someday, but when, you know. And I did the A to Z project, 2020 to 2023, basically. And that took me 3 years and a bunch of other helpers. Spent 17 months in the lab dissecting, and about 18 months editing the footage that we shot. And I compared two forms side by side, Anna and Z, thus anatomy from A to Z, Anna and Z. And then I documented those two bodies. And about 2 weeks to the end of that monster project, I was like, oh my gosh, now I have to do the nerve project. This is the time. Now I've done this incredible comparison of the tissues of these two bodies. But when you dissect by layer, you prune the tree really hard. And pruning the tree really hard, it didn't really do as nice a job on the nerves of Anna and Z as I would have liked to, in terms of telling a larger story of the human body that includes not only the layers, but also the trees. And so I knew at that point, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to do another giant project, the nerve project. And it took, from when I realized time was going to come, and that I finally had the life circumstances where I could do such a thing, because the lab where you've taken your classes, and the Institute for Anatomical Research in Colorado Springs, has its own rhythms, and it's not a university laboratory. It's not booked, every day all year long. There are gaps of time available. And in the winter, no one wants to come to Colorado and dissect. It's cold and scary, and people don't want to come. It's actually more beautiful than people know, but the rumor is it's like that. And so nobody comes in the winter. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to take over the lab next winter, and I'll do this project. And so that's how the nerve project was born. And the intent was not to accomplish what those folks from Kirksville College of Osteopathic Medicine did. I had to let that go, because I figured it would probably take me about 2 years to do what they had done. And it would be a great effort. And I didn't have 2 years in the lab. I had a block of time, 4.5 months. And so I knew I had to be selective in what I could present. And that I couldn't demonstrate in context every nerve tissue in the body, which is kind of how I like to roll. Instead, I was going to have to be selective. And so I did some cutaneous nerves, and I did as much of the plexuses of the musculoskeletal body as I could manage. I did the a thorough job on the autonomic nerves, and that was because I knew that they were the least accounted for, and the least comprehensible, and the most obscure and hard to get to. And so I worked my butt off for about 3 months of the project, which ended up taking a total of 5 months, to demonstrate the autonomic plexuses, because they were just like a rumor to me. I don't know how I managed never to see them. I knew where they belonged, but they're not easy to differentiate, and or to even identify, and then differentiate, because they're buried in other tissues. They're buried in lymphatics. Then you have to sort them out from there, and they don't want to let go. They like living as they do. And so it's a real, and yet having done so through this process, and I think I actually did that part more thoroughly than the Kirksville folks did, or more thorough than I've seen done actually in the books or anywhere. I did a real thorough job on the autonomics, and still realize how truncated and impossibly simplified is my own presentation of it relative to the actual manifest reality inside the body. I realize I basically have to falsify it to make it even visible to an extent. It's so undifferentiated in some ways from its connective tissue housing that in order for you to be able to see it as anything else but just a blob of tissue that has no meaning, you have to take enough of it away that your eyes can kind of get in between it and start to connect with something. So I had a good time with those autonomics, and also I had Joe Dispenza in mind as well. Do you know Joe Dispenza? He's a teacher. He's a chiropractor from Life Chiropractic who had some traumatic body experiences that he then healed, and he ended up becoming kind of a famous person. He was in like What the Bleep and stuff like that. And now he is a wonderful teacher of personal self-development. Through meditation mostly, and a lot of people take up that work and do amazing healing shifts in their bodies that are to be commended, those people who do that work and accomplish that. And Joe is constantly turning it back on them, like, I didn't do it seriously. Like he's like totally serious, like, you did that, and that is, you're like amazing health athlete to have accomplished your own healing in that way. And so I looked into his work and the way that he talked about things. And being a chiropractor, he's really into nerves. He prefers to talk about nerve plexuses than chakras because, even the word chakra can be polarizing to certain communities who would find that scary or fanciful, or depending upon whether you're a scientist or a religious person, you might be put off by that language. And so he doesn't use that language. Well, it's very clear that's what he's talking about. uh, he just uses language of the nervous system. I was like, well, he's talking about these plexuses and trying to understand the rationale for the way that he relates these plexuses to various chakras. And so I was quite determined to see if I could, witness that in the body, and in so doing, allow other people to witness it so that they could meditate better on it. Was really my hope, that me, or meditate on it or embody it would be another way to put it all together. To say enter into relationship with it. It's very hard for us to enter into relationship with things that we can't see or imagine. It just becomes word salad, and you can't really get connected to word salad necessarily, right? So if you actually see, like, oh, this network of tissues, here's where it lives, and if I can go to that place in my body with my mind, I can pay attention to that area of my body, and I can expand the connection there, and then possibly reset it in its relationships, enter into a different kind of relationship that I've been so far by not having any connection to it. So it is my hope that this work, when it's all edited out and I'm done with this tour, will be a resource for people who want to take that deep dive of self-transformation through connection to those areas of their body. Open up
Absolutely.
those,
It's wonderful. It's so amazing because I've found links, in some of the work that I've done to like felt sensation in the body, thought, emotion, and then belief about self. And it's identifying that relationship and then learning how to reframe the misunderstanding, right? Reframe this, perceived negative belief about self or wholeness so that we can come back into a more embodied place. And I was just absolutely over the moon that you were, looking at it that way. Because I do a lot of work in clinical settings. My specialty is cardiac cancer and eating recovery. And
Mm,
so I wanted to be able to talk to doctors about this, that, the gastric plexus and the celiac plexus are related to this part of us that is about empowerment. And when we feel disempowered, we want to go to the bathroom and feel nauseous and
mm,
have diarrhea. You know, I mean, like
mm,
there's a connection there. And so
mm,
these beliefs impact directly how we feel in the body and our desire to be embodied, So I think
mm.
there's so much work to be done, Gil, and you're an inspiration to me, and I know to a lot of other people out there as well.
Have you been on the tour, Michelle? Did we meet on the tour, or am I
Yeah.
coming to where you're going?
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
did you?
I was in Austin, and
Right.
we brought the MVP crowd there, and and I've been talking up, your work and just cadavers in general for a long time, and
Mm,
giving us more frame of reference and context to have real conversations with people in different professions, because I think that, I mean, it's an important part of creating wholeness in our healthcare system, which is, I think, one of the
mm.
areas of opportunity, you could say, in that system.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I'm sitting here in my brain trying to remember Austin. It was 20 talks ago, and they all sort of start to wash into each other. Was it a hotel room? Where were we? Like
we
I
were
can't
in we were in a gym setting,
a gym.
like a large gym, like body working sort of facility.
Oh, I remember that place. Yeah, it was literally a gym. And yeah, that's right. And they had like that long like a road that people roll things on, and we had to set the chairs off in the corner to avoid the lights. Now I remember it. Yeah, thank you. Oh, it gets a little scary when you've just done something and it's completely gone. You know, I do remember
Making room
that.
for other stuff. Well,
Yeah. Yes.
what is the next project that you have on the horizon? Have you thought about it?
Well, this project is still going to go for a while because it's hardly done. We shot 97 different days of footage during the 5 months of the project, and I haven't edited any of it yet, just enough to make a few little videos for the Nerve tour, and for I had Joe in mind actually for that. But so I have to edit that, and it's a complicated editing job. It is a lot of words, and they come fast and furious because I do many tours of the tissues, and I wasn't always accurate, In other words, when you take your first pass and you're like, you say it's something, and then the second pass and you say it's something, but then on the fourth pass over that area you realize, oh dang, that was something else. And now I gotta go back and fix all those videos or chuck them or only use the final one or something like that. And so it's not so simple an editing project. The A to Z project, I'd be like, I'm going to dissect pec major. I'm going to point the camera at it until I'm done. We're going to stop. I put a start and a title and I put an end on it. Pectoralis major, Z, and then I go to the next thing and I put a conclusion with a thank you and I go to the next video. This is going to be like massive titling and stuff. So it will probably take me a year just to edit out the videos for that. Maybe more. I don't know. So once I've done that, ask me what my next project is, because I don't dare say anything out loud. I try
Yeah.
not even to think it in my head because I'm so obsessive and compulsive that if I actually form the thought too hard, then I'll have to do it. It's like, Lord, no, don't
Yeah.
make me do that again, because I can't even describe to you the physical and mental challenges that accompany the kind of work that results in what I've been sharing. Is brutal. I froze this shoulder, which is now getting better. Check it out. Isn't this awesome? Oh,
Oh,
I can,
wow.
I can do that. Like, I think when I was in Austin, I couldn't put my hands around people's back to take pictures. My arm was just dangling there. And since then, I've managed to, get all of this movement. So that's another part of my tour project, is recovering my shoulder. Because literally, I spent 5 months, like 6, 7, 8, 10, 12 hours a day with my arm in one position to hold that hemostat and fix that tissue. And I fixed the tissue and I fixed the tissue. So now I'm undoing my adhesive capsulitis for the last few months. So maybe when I'm in totally good shape and my body is ready for another massive undertaking. I mean, I do want to go further into the pelvis. I didn't, I learned a lot dissecting Captain's pelvis. I think I got further as a pelvic preparation on him than any other body I've ever worked on. And yet it's very hard to photograph a deep pelvis in situ. Like, in other words, I did the dissection, there is the tissue, but try and get a camera to like capture the relationships is very challenging. And because it was the nerve project, I didn't go the extra days and miles to completely photograph the pelvic structures the way I would like to. And I learned a lot in the process. I've got it in my brain like never before, but I have considered, before Rachel and I planned this nerve tour back in 2019, well, actually in 2020, in January 2020, this lady, Jo Fee, who's a wonderful yoga teacher, a yin yoga person who's traveled the world and taken my class a million times. Jo Fee from Singapore invited me and Robert Schleip and a couple other people to Berlin to do a talk. So I did like a 3-hour talk, and Jo was like, "Can you come and do that?" I'm like, "Oh, I don't know." She's like, "Come on, come on." I said, "Just so long as I don't have to talk about fascia." She's like, "You can talk about anything you want." So I was like, "Fine, I'm going to talk about sex and the Sacred Heart." And she's like, "All right." So I did this whole crazy preparation. I did like a balloon show, like a guy from a circus, and I blew up balloons. And I constructed very complex models of the pars intima, as I like to call them, while talking and demonstrating all these different structures, and then talked about their relationship to the heart. And so I was like, we could take that on the road. This could be really fun. I didn't film it. It was like a one-off thing. I have no idea how I did what I did, but I could potentially, I thought at the moment, I have a lot of cool stuff on the pelvis. I have a lot of cool stuff on our intimate zone, as it were. But I would need to do more work to really bring it forward at the level that I would want to, with the level of clarity and obviousness. You can't educate if it's not kind of obvious. And I try and make things so obvious that it's like, bong, you can't miss it. It's like, it's like, oh, there it is, and we're not talking about it. We're looking at it and we're having a kind of connection with it. And so I think I could do better on pelvic structures in that regard. And then also, having accumulated that, the nerve tree is amazing, and so is the heart tree. And so the heart tree, to demonstrate the heart tree would be profound, much the way I've demonstrated the nerve tree.
Beautiful. Well, I look forward to all of your upcoming endeavors, Gil. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us. Give us your website, just for anybody who's not familiar with Gil's site. It is an amazing resource. And just like MVP, Gil is all about accessibility and affordability. So you can get just about everything in the kitchen sink for the low, low price of, what is it again?
$15 a month.
Yeah.
Or you can just come for $15, quit, and then and it won't recur. It's a recurring payment. So for those people who are afraid they won't cancel, you can just join for 1 month for $25. Or you can join for 15 months and cancel yourself, or ask me to cancel for you and I'll do it. Or you can just stay for a while, because you may not be able to watch literally like,
thousands of hours.
I mean, you have to watch me for like 11 hours a day for like, yeah. So it's a lot. And if you did go through my site, you would have an incredible anatomy education. And if you just went through the free membership, which is the Easy Rider membership, you would also have an incredible education, a good starting point for just about anything.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, gilhadley.com is where it all is. I also have for members like a monthly live program where I have amazing guests and I talk to them and folks come and listen and ask them questions. So
Well, we loved having you, Gil. Thank you so much. I look forward to being able to connect with you again soon.
great. I appreciate you, Michelle, for sharing your platform and for helping spread the word. It is a pure word of mouth thing we're doing here. And so those mouths are really important to us. Thank you.
Absolutely. Take care.